Every club. Every day. The Global Sports Podcast Network.
Your body is unique. And Global Sports Podcast Network has partnered with Bioniq, the world's most personalised supplements. Bioniq provide 100% tailor-made supplements designed to deliver precisely what your body needs at exactly the right levels to optimise your health. No guessing. So click the link in the show notes. Use the code GSPN2025 for 40% off your first month's subscription. Bioniq. Don't settle for off-the-shelf solutions made for just anybody. Get what's right for you right now.
Hello and welcome to the Daily Liverpool Podcasts, brought to you by the Global Sports Podcast Network. Today's the Monday review show, and with the Reds having a pretty rare weekend off thanks to Plymouth, we thought it best to keep the good vibes going and good feelings around the club going by reliving some of our last era's highlights. On today's episode, we'll be covering Doubters to Believers, a documentary all about our beloved former manager, Jurgen Klopp. It's just dropped on Prime. You can catch it on there. It's a 4-part documentary series that kind of focuses on, you know, his Liverpool legacy, but also touches on how he became a manager, his playing career, a little bit of Minds, the kind of person he is. Some of the talking head interviews they get are phenomenal. And I think it's structured in an interesting way. So, like I mentioned, it's four episodes long. They're all about around 40 minutes, 45 minutes long. And what I really like is that it's almost like there's two timelines. The first one is Klopp's journey at Liverpool. And then the second timeline, which is kind of interspliced with that, and kind of reinforces, I should say, some of the narratives that are happening in the first timeline, the Klopp timeline at Liverpool. You get his career before that. So it starts off with his playing career. It starts off with the kind of manager he was almost destined to become. You know, the first episode is titled Accidental Manager, which I think is really funny because, it's something I didn't know, how he becomes the manager at his first club, Minds, which he was a player at. He was a striker, actually, who wore number 4, which I don't know how I feel about that. But there's something about it that kind of makes sense. He has that build that's almost centre-half-ish. And it looks like, you know, not to jump too much ahead about Liverpool signings and players that Klopp brought in, but it's kind of given Stephen Cocker up front, you know. But apparently he was really quick. You know, you see him score a few good goals in there. There's just something about it that looks kind of cool. But yeah, you see him at Minds. You see him eventually become the manager, following a pretty funny story that Klopp himself tells. And then you kind of also get what I find really interesting is the foundations of that Doubters to Believers, that title of the documentary, that kind of aphorism that's become so wedded to Liverpool fans, myself included. You kind of see the foundations of it begin at Minds. So, for instance, and you guys will know this if you've listened to the podcast before, you'll know that I've mentioned a few times that I studied film, did a master's and an undergrad in it here in Liverpool. I'm still based here. I love documentaries. I love sports documentaries, especially about football, but you don't really get good ones. And I was very skeptical about this, but let me just tell you right now, top line review, is it better than the Brendan Rodgers We Are Liverpool or Being Liverpool, whatever it was called? 100 million gazillion %. Yes, it is. So don't worry about that. But I was thinking about this Doubters to Believers thing, and I mentioned that the foundations of that being so wedded to Klopp and thus Liverpool and thus us kind of begins at Mainz, because they are a team in the second division, the Zweite Bundesliga, and they just have something about them where they kind of feel like they belong in the Bundesliga, but there isn't enough quality there. The former manager isn't doing so well. The football is boring. Klopp as a player, I think it's a game against Wolfsburg. It's a battle for promotion, and he kind of gives this on-pitch conference afterwards, this on-pitch discussion afterwards to a reporter. This really passionate speech where he says that like we just weren't good enough, but it's one of those, and it's kind of like you see the resilience and the we'll go again thing transpires. Obviously, that they weren't very good the next year. The manager gets sacked. Klopp gets brought in. People think it's a joke, but very, very quickly do people start to realize like, oh, something's here. And you know, he might not be the most tactically astute manager at that time, but he has something. And he mentions, I think, quite sweetly, they were a team of friends, you know. And it also talks about David Wagner's a talking head in the documentary. He features quite a bit. Often publicised that he was Klopp's best man and Klopp's best friend, but also a pretty good manager in his own right. Also a player at Mainz during the same time. And again, there is something to be said for somebody who keeps the people important to him around him and knows the importance of it. So the fact that he's featured, I think, is really sweet. There's a German musician whose name I can't remember. I think it's Campino is the artist's name. He's featured quite a lot. He's in a very funny video. I don't know if people must have seen it following the Real Madrid defeat in the Champions League final for Liverpool. They sing this song about Madrid had all the luck, and he's in the video along with Peter Krawitz. It's pretty funny. But yeah, something about that Mainz time I just find so. It's like you get to see the foundations of something before they're fully realized, and that goes for him as a manager too, because you eventually see him move to Dortmund, grow again. All the stuff that happens to Dortmund grows again, goes on holiday, comes to Liverpool, and as we all know, in the recent era is easily the best Liverpool manager that we've had, and for me anyway, probably the most important figure at a football club in the Premier League that I can remember. Especially, obviously, I'm biased being a Liverpool fan, but anyway, we can get on to the Liverpool stuff a bit later on. I do also want to talk a little bit about how this documentary opens, because it's no, it's not a coincidence that it opens with the day of Klopp announcing his decision to step down, which again, easily one of the biggest moments in my Liverpool supporting career. I remember exactly where I was. I remember how I felt when the news broke. For context, I've mentioned before, I live in Liverpool. I was in my old flat at the time. Before me and my partner moved in together, she was at my house. I went for a shower. I came out, and I've also mentioned before my girlfriend supports Everton. I came out of the shower and I was drying myself or whatever, and she said, Klopp's been sacked, or Klopp's been fired, or something like that. And I was like, okay, good one. Klopp's gone, or something like that. And I was like, yeah, I'm sure he is. Okay, yeah, and I'm the next pope, or something like that. And then she said it again, and I was like, okay. So I checked my phone, and being a diehard Red, obviously follow all the Liverpool accounts. Paul Joyce, Mel Reddy, James Pearce, all the breaking news people. And it was confirmed, and I just thought, like, I felt shell shocked. It was insane. I've never had that where you look at your phone and there's breaking news and you think, oh my god, And I think for a lot of Liverpool fans, it felt like a pivotal moment. Obviously, I mean, the greatest manager in their recent history has announced he's leaving, and then I remember being I just couldn't understand it. I thought something has happened, and you see his press conference, and he says his game, his managerial prowess is based on having the energy to be able to transmit that to his players, and it takes all of them. And if you don't have that energy, if you can't give up your all, you need to leave. And I think like the ability to look inwards, to be that reflective and realize like I'm doing this for the greater good, it doesn't get talked about often enough. And even if Arne Slot came in and he wasn't the revelation that he is now, I think that decision from Klopp is still so important, and it really should be heralded, because how often do you see managers stay on longer than they should, or I think knowing when to leave anything, whether it's a job, whether it's whatever, friendship, whatever, is so important. And being able to do that on the biggest stage with all the pressure, loving the club, loving the city, and just saying, you know what, I'm not going to be able to do this, I think is a real testament to the kind of man he is. And also there's quite a few moments like that come up further in the documentary. So I guess in terms of structure and in terms of the way that's all laid out, I find that it really helps reinforce these key messages, these key points. And don't worry, I'm not going to get all film critic nonsense on you. But I love this saying, the medium is the message. It's how things are transmitted, and it's not what you say, but how you say it. And I think Klopp is a master of that, you know. And listen, he obviously admits in the documentary there are times where, you know, he might not have conducted himself the best, where he lost his temper, where he was really aggressive towards officials. And I don't condone any of that. I don't think that's good at all. But there is something for the way he speaks to his players, and you do see that. So I mentioned that you're not really going to get the kind of inside scoop on his exit or dressing room fallouts or any of that stuff. But what I do think is really important is you see those little moments that help you realize, like, oh, the kind of person that we think this man is, I'm seeing it now. And listen, he's a very media savvy person. And obviously it's a documentary that is distributed by Amazon, but put forward by the club as well. They're obviously going to spin it in a positive light. And he's obviously going to be able to make himself seem like the best person ever, because he's a manager who's been in the media for years. But it still feels genuine to me, and I think that's really important. Again, I kind of mentioned it a little bit. I love the throwbacks in it. So the time at Mainz, the time at Dortmund, you see the emergence of some players that I just think, like, wow, how have we forgotten about that? Those early Dortmund times where Klopp talks about the first time he sees Mario Götze at 16 years old and thinks, like, oh my God, who is this kid? He's legit. One that really stood out to me though, and like I've mentioned before, I'm a huge Football Manager fan. I used to love playing FIFA too when I was younger. Seeing Neven Subotic, whatever his name was, in that Dortmund yellow kit, God, that's just so cool. You know, maybe I'm looking back with rose tinted glasses, but there's something just that it tickled that nice little nostalgia part of me. I loved it. I love the throwbacks, and I mentioned the way that the documentary is structured. You kind of get throwbacks to where Liverpool were at that time too. So during this incredible rivalry, the kind of era one of Klopp versus Guardiola, of Dortmund versus Bayern, of all these players, of all, you know, Lewandowski and Götze going to Bayern. You get these incredible matches in the Champions League, in the Cup, in the Bundesliga too. We also get to see where Liverpool were at, and you know, it was a dark time, man. It was a dark time. We had Brendan Rodgers at the helm. Liverpool were, how should I say, I think maybe ahead of, I don't know if that's right. They were ahead of something, and I think maybe it's themselves, you know. I don't think they should have been anywhere near title challenging really, but something clicked that year in 13-14, and everything was going really well, and they just have to do it. They have to do it. They show the infamous Gerrard slip against Mourinho's Chelsea, and I just remember it was 11 years ago now, I remember being 16, the heartbreak of it. I remember the Lazar Markovic of it all, the Martin Skrtel of it all, it just wasn't, it doesn't look like the kind of title winning team that we are now accustomed to. And there were so many incredible moments in that season, and it's one of those where you look back on and you think, if we had to suffer this to get the end result of Klopp coming in, would you still do it? And like I mentioned, it was 11 years ago. I was 16. It was a pretty rough time being 16 anyway. But being 16 and having your heart broken by football, something you can't control for the first time, although the Fernando Torres sale also broke my heart a little bit. It hit a lot that time. I remember it was the first time being really devastated with football. And I think if I knew then what was to come, I would have, easily washed my hands of it and said, yeah, I'll take 3 more of those. Go on. Let's see what happens. Because it does, episode 1 ends with Klopp joining Liverpool, having that speech, doubters to believers. And there is something to be said for, I've mentioned that it's something that kind of feels wedded to Liverpool now. I am such a pessimist, and Jesse and the boys often joke about how I'm the pessimist of the group when it comes to football. But I can't help but almost romanticize it a little bit too, because it just feels like, obviously this is the title of the documentary, this could almost be a sign on the, at Anfield somewhere, or the training ground, like doubters to believers feels so, it's such a short piece of, it's like such a short aphorism that really hits home. And the doubters to believers thing kind of perforates the whole entire documentary. I find it really interesting when Klopp comes in on his second day. Him and Pep Linders, a baby-faced Pep Linders, by the way, who wasn't assistant manager at the time. The first thing they do is they go to the academy. They get to see some of the young players playing there. And obviously all the focus is on Trent Alexander, a young Trent Alexander-Arnold wearing number 5 with the armband on. And just the quality of this kid, like, he stands out. You see it in the footage. Like, he's quicker, he's stronger. The way he runs with the ball is just so impressive. And there's a bit where Klopp talks quite warmly about Trent, and you just think like, oh, okay, this is the making of something. He mentions, I mentioned earlier, sorry, when talking about Mario Götze at Dortmund, he was like, he says this thing of, this kid's 16, can he play in the Bundesliga? And you think immediately he's got Trent kind of earmarked as there's potential here for he could jump into. But you'll remember, just like I will, the first season under Klopp, well, the half season when he comes in the first proper season, it isn't all perfect. We get to some really good moments. There's the Europa League final. But there's still something around Liverpool that doesn't feel right yet. It hasn't fully clicked. Not everyone is buying in. So they, again, quite painfully show another throwback to a game against Crystal Palace in his first season. And believe me, I hated Crystal Palace back then, partly because of the whole Cristambull thing, which is pretty funny. I will give them credit for that. I quite like Palace now, for what it's worth. But obviously Scott Dan scores the winner, and there's a bit where Klopp goes into the post-match press conference after losing to Crystal Palace and says he feels alone, like the fans left before the game was over. He felt like they kind of left him there, and what's the point in his team fighting if the people aren't believing in his team to fight, And he kind of gets across this message that everything is integrated. The team should be integrated with the fans, and the fans should be integrated with the team, and the manager should kind of sit alongside that somewhere too. And also the club above should also be kind of integrated with it as well. There should be buy-in on all fronts, basically. And I think it's very interesting that immediately after that, they show the West Brom 2-2 at Anfield, where they come back. I think Divock Origi scores the equaliser. And Adam Lallana's in the documentary, and he mentions, like, I think it was kind of embarrassing. He's basically saying this kind of sucked, but Klopp felt so happy that the fans stuck by them and that the team performed for the fans. That kind of symbiotic relationship felt like that was the kind of embers of that fire starting there. And I think when I look back on that time, I remember I've mentioned before when I living here in Liverpool and going to uni here, one of my best friends here is a massive Man United fan, and I remember him and another friend giving me grief because of the draw and because it was kind of, they probably said cringe, or it was probably embarrassing or something like that. Um, and looking back on it, I think I can see where they're coming from, but I was immediately bought into because I've never seen that before. And it felt like I said, integration. It felt like there's buy-in on all fronts here, and the team go and clap the fans clap the team off. And I wonder, and you guys, if when you're listening, you can let us know on socials or by emailing in, what moment really sticks out as the kind of catalyst for everything. Obviously, there's more than one, because I think this Liverpool go through so many versions, not just in terms of personnel, but also in terms of approach, in terms of opposition they play, competitions they play in, goals they try and achieve. I wonder, what do you think kind of sparked it all? Because for me, we don't get the Anfield turnaround against Barcelona if there isn't this game, you know. And, you know, you can completely tell me I'm wrong here, but if we don't get that equaliser against West Brom, if we don't clap the fans off and the fans don't clap us off, do we get that? I'm not too sure. I'm really not too sure. You can let me know what you guys think. But I think the thing that I'm interested in the most, as somebody who, you know, loves football almost as much as I love Liverpool, which is quite a lot, is that intangible relationship, and is the emotions of it all, and is the things that you can't touch and you can't see, but you can feel them, you know? I think, again, obviously I'm biased. I think there is no other club in world football that has that, really, the same way that we do. They're going to have their own version of it. But the way that Liverpool is, the way that we feel about the fans, the way the fans feel about the team, the way that the city feels about, the red half of the city feels about the club, the players, the way they feel about all things football and how Liverpool are situated within that, I think is just so special. And would anyone else have been able to connect like that? There are some incredible managers during the time that Klopp was at Liverpool that came into the league, or we saw in other leagues that maybe might not have been the right fit for the team they were in, but have went on to do good things. And I wonder, is the Klopp at Liverpool just the most match made in heaven thing ever? You know, I'm not too sure. You guys can let me know. Like I said, yeah, you guys can let me know. But I'm just going to take a quick break, and you can hear a little bit more from one of our sponsors.
Here at Global Sports Podcast Network, we spent a lot of time selecting our delivery platform. Zencastr came out the clear winner. With 4K video recording from your phone and AI editing that automatically removes all those ums and ahs, it's super easy to start a podcast that sounds great and is delivered efficiently. If you're ready to tell your story, check out the link in the show description to learn more about Zencastr.
So I mentioned a little bit briefly about how the West Brom thing was kind of a turning point for Liverpool. They don't spend a lot of time on that in the documentary. It's because there's so many moments. There's so many ups and downs and highs and lows and big performances and terrible results and all of that. But there's something about the collective buy-in. I think I keep saying that, the buy-in, that relationship that kind of makes the tough moments easier to bear. You know, it feels like the highs of a cup win are that much greater because you get to share it with people, just the way that the pain of, I think about the Real Madrid, you know, the Loris Karius game. I should actually say the Gareth Bale game, because what a goal and what a moment. The pain of that, I mean, I remember what it was like, but to be able to share that with a fan base that also gets it just like you get it, it lessens the load a little bit. And there were some incredibly big heartbreaks in there, and some massive performances, massive wins, all that stuff. And there was some, like, the way I see it is how many footballing careers were kind of gilded and bolstered by being able to play for the Klopp Liverpool side that was just incredible, Um, and this is a little bit of an exercise for people listening. I'd love to know who do you think, what stands out from the early era, the late era? So not just that I mentioned the West Brom being like the catalyst, but also I want to know, give me a match that stands out, or a player that stands out, or a result that stands out, or like even a specific moment, because I'm not one to shout out other podcasts on here, and I won't spend too much time on it. I listen to the Ripple Effect quite a lot, and I'm very interested in the things that are, the ripples that come from these tiny, that might seem like small and inconsequential moments. I always wonder, I wonder how that would shake out if it played out a different way. And for me, I think the Karius thing is huge. They don't spend that much time on it, which is a bit of a shame, because I feel like he had a really tough time following that game. But what thing I do really like, I think, is in episode 3. It cuts to modern day Liverpool, and we see Darwin Núñez miss a few chances. I think it's against Chelsea. He takes a penalty off Alexis McAllister, hits the post. He smashes a header off the crossbar. We also see him hit the post in an open net for some time. And I think this becomes even more clear now after some of the conversations that I've had on this podcast with Jesse and Louis and Adarsh and Tom and the boys, and about Darwin Núñez, and even that when we spoke in the group chat, what you read online, what other fans mention, there is so much vitriol around him. And listen, I've not been completely fair, I don't think, to him either. I don't think he's the sole reason that Liverpool haven't won the league already, But I do think there are times for him to improve. And there's a great bit in the documentary where you see Klopp kind of take him under his wing and talk to him, and then it cuts to Pep Linders, who, by the way, comes out of this documentary so well. He just seems like such a good dude, and he seems to really get it. I love that there's a bit where they play paddle, and I love that when he beats Klopp, he's taking the hand out of him, and he's really goading him, and just seeing that relationship's quite nice. But there's a bit with him and Darwin Núñez where they're breaking down his game, and they're talking about what he was like at Benfica, the goals and the assists that he get, the pressing and the intensity that he offers, and what he can give to the team. And you kind of see, like, okay, it isn't just buzzwords. It isn't just intensity, to give Pep Linders the title of his book here. It isn't just saying words and not actually meaning them. They mean it. It does work for the team. You do have to give it all. You do win and lose as a team, and when the team wins, it's the team's responsibility, and the team's it's their chance to be congratulated. And when the team loses, Klopp takes it on his back. And I just think, like, you hear that all the time, but I wonder what it would have been like to be on the inside those dressing rooms after some of the big results, big defeats, and seeing the difference in contrast. There's a great quote in the documentary where Klopp says the differences in between defeat and winning are the biggest in the world, and he basically says something like, it's like the distance between the moon and Mars. And I thought that's quite nice. He people often say that if he wasn't a football manager, he'd be a pretty gifted politician. But he's definitely a very good orator, and he knows how to speak properly. But I find the whole relationship with the coaching staff and Klopp, that ability to kind of build a team, build another team, rebuild that team, push them again, keep pushing them against constant setbacks time and time again, after results go their way, when results don't go their way. I've mentioned some of the big heartbreaks. That Real Madrid game was huge. Losing the title on 97 points is ridiculous. Will any team ever do that again? I don't know. And I mentioned intensity. That's often a word that kind of underpinned that era. And it was Pep Lijnders' kind of almost mantra. It's the title of his book. It's the kind of way that team was coached with Lijnders and Vitor Matos and Klopp and all those guys, and Alex Inglethorpe in the academy, really pushing these players to be, hungry and fight like hell. They keep saying fight like hell. But you could easily say another mantra, another word of wisdom to live by, and something that kind of fits maybe in retrospect, but also in practice, I think, when you see the matches in isolated events like we kind of do sometimes in the documentary, is resilience. It's constantly striving to do better, to do more, to give everything. And, we saw what it was like for players it's like those Liverpool teams and, other teams that Klopp managed, they kind of squeeze all the juice and energy and life out of some of these players. Look at what happened when Liverpool's midfield, the legs just go in them. When Fabinho looks like he's, playing in treacle every day. When Henderson, who was without a doubt instrumental, and I don't think he's covered enough really in it. He's in it a bit, but he's not really covered in it. Those players who were just so intense and like kind of set the tone for what performances were going to be time and time again. Bobby Firmino, who is almost like jack of all trades, master of none, but guess what? He's also a master at almost everything else too. He was just phenomenal footballer. Sadio Mane, Andy Robertson, Mo Salah when he, pre-injury Mo Salah when he was just like lightning quick, tore players to shreds. You see resilience and constant ability to go again and go again. And I've mentioned a few quotes now from the documentary. Another one I really like is after, I think it's after the 97-point season where Liverpool don't win the league. Klopp says something along the lines of how sad of a life you must have if you think you only have one chance at something. And I just thought, like, I really took that from this, and it kind of sums up this Liverpool team resilience. A great bit again we see from last season, that Carabao Cup final. Liverpool have 11 injured first team players going into that final. Within a handful of minutes, Ryan Gravenberch, pre-emergence Ryan Gravenberch, gets injured, comes out of the team. I think James McConnell comes on. Liverpool somehow battle against it. The £1 billion bottle jobs, by the way, to win that game. Virgil van Dijk scores that header in extra time, wins that game. And you just think, like, the ability to lift all of those people around them stems from Klopp, stems from Lijnders, stems from all of it, I should say. And you kind of see that in Van Dijk too. And I think, he is the perfect Klopp player, I think. And where he plays and his kind of lax attitude isn't really Kloppish in terms of, the things that are the kind of behaviours that you're expected, but the mentality is, and I think that's probably been the foundation that we see now in where Liverpool are at, if that makes sense. Without that foundation of Virgil van Dijk at the back and that kind of ability to lift everyone else around you and be calm, but be composed, but be tenacious and win and perform in big moments and have the confidence to do so, is really, really, really embedded in this Liverpool team. And I mentioned that building and constantly building. I think the third episode is titled "The Kids Are All Right," and I just love that because there's so much. I mentioned the Klopp's second day. He goes to the training grounds, to the youth academy. There's so much of Connor Bradley's in this. Jadon Danns is in it. Harvey Elliott features a lot. Like, you get to see the foundations of something. And again, talk about a testament to the kind of man he is. It's all about building for the next thing. It's always about going again, even when he's not involved. I think that really sums him up. And I think, just quickly to wrap up, it's a weird one, going down memory lane like that, because Klopp loomed so large. Like, he is such an emotional manager, and Liverpool are such an emotional club, and City, that when you're re-watching stuff like this, if you're a fan like I am of a club like Liverpool, and you're re-watching and reliving these moments, it kind of feels like, how do I say it? It kind of feels like you're looking back at an old photo album or something. You don't just kind of look back at where Liverpool were in their hunt for titles, or in the, you don't look back on where they were in the pits of despair following some of those horrible losses. You also can remember where you watched those games. I mean, I do. I remember where I saw the Barcelona comeback. I remember who I watched it with. You remember who you watched them with. And also, if you're like me, whose entire early adulthood was underpinned by the Klopp era, you kind of remember what person you were during those times. So you might not love revisiting all of it like I did, but it all kind of adds up. And like Klopp's teams, the sum of the parts is always more important than the parts themselves. And even the way the documentary has kind of been spinned, like when it first was announced, it was following the behind the scenes of Klopp's Liverpool pushing for a quadruple, which ultimately we know didn't quite work out. But now it's a retrospective on the man who shaped, reshaped, and then built the foundations for his successor. And that's kind of indicative of the kind of person that he is. For my money, he was the perfect man for Liverpool at the time, and the way Liverpool were. And hopefully, when we look back on the Arne Slot era, whenever that comes to an end, we can look forward to the next manager at the helm, because like Klopp mentioned, and it sounds a bit saccharine almost, but like, he has turned the fan base from doubters to believers. And I know that I am now, I said before, I'm always called the pessimistic one, but that's kind of just because I don't really want to suffer again. But you know what? Supporting Liverpool, I know that I'm going to have to, but I also know the good times are coming. And look where Liverpool are now. I think the release of this documentary it's probably serendipitous, but it's timed so perfectly, because the emotion and the mood in the fan base was already at such a high. And looking back on what kind of got us to where we are now, and hopefully where we're going to go, it just buoys that mood all over. So you know what? Things are looking good for Liverpool. But listen, I'm going to leave you guys there. Thank you so much for listening. Make sure you follow us on socials. Please do get in touch through those socials or through emails. I'll put those in the description below. And listen, it's a huge month for Liverpool. So thanks for staying with us. Please do continue to stay with us. And hopefully we can share another trophy win this season. Cheers, guys. Take care.
Every club, every day. The Global Sports Podcast Network.